Welcome back to another edition of Force Friday, where we talk about Star Wars theories, characters, concepts, comparisons, analyzations, collectibles, and more. And today we're going to talk about the evolution of Star Wars The Black Series. Having covered history of the line, what came out and what year, etc., we're now going to take a look at the evolution. This is important for several reasons as the line currently stands, and for about the last 2 years, Black Series is offering some of the best painted, sculpted, and overall bang for your buck figures at that price point. It's gone from a line that was only moderately successful and largely looked down at by articulation junkies to something that has become possibly the most successful in terms of execution 1/12 line on the market, especially at mass retail in the West. Look, and I'll probably use just footage of a lot of my diorama stuff for this. Makes life a little easier for me. People tend to enjoy to see it, and I have a new one, so enjoy. Since the line's inception, the goal of Black Series has always been about detail, capturing the nuances of a character and their look. As the license holder, Lucasfilm has always been notoriously high with the standards it holds in this regard, far more so than other brands like Marvel. Aside from a few notable misses throughout 2014 through 16, this is one of the things where the line has been the most successful. Pretty much all of Black Series has been sculpted digitally, meaning figures are able to capture subtleties like the texture of a jacket, but at the same time, it should be noted, there are some purists that are kind of turned off by the digital sculpting technique. I'm not 100% sure why that is. To me, digital sculpting is just like any other tool, it just makes the job a little bit easier and a little bit more exact. Is kind of the evolution of the art. That's my take on it. But another thing that has to be noted is how little reuse there is. Most typical $20 6-inch figures like Marvel Legends or Power Rangers have tons of reuse, with figures built on standard body types. And I know this better than most with my Marvel Legends collection, which I'll show off a little bit here. There is no limit, much like Master P in a gold-plated tank, as to how far they will reuse one mold over and over and over and over again. This isn't the case with Black Series. Outside of Troopers, or some very rare exceptions like Jaina Solo sharing a body with Dr. Aphra, not only is it not very practical with Star Wars characters, it's downright impossible. And as a result, most releases get all new sculpts. Paint has also been a high priority. Washes and dry brushes are very common in the line and done to different degrees of execution. Their washes tend to be well done, their dry brushing is kind of hit or miss. But in terms of the evolution, paint has always been pretty high on this line, but took a fairly severe downturn from 2014 through 16 for most of the Force Awakens and Rogue One stuff, to be fair. Thankfully, paint apps have been massively cleaned up beginning in 2017 and have stayed consistently good since. Of course, we have to talk about the face paint, but that comes later. So the visual representation from the beginning has been one of the highest priorities within the line, and something that even when the paint was bad was always there. Let's move on to articulation. When the line began in 2013, 3 3/4 had peaked in this regard. And to be fair, in my opinion, not done as well as what the Marvel Legends 3.75 line was doing in terms of articulation. Black Series, though, are pretty similar to the 3 3/4 line, but the larger scale means they can do it far more elegantly. Articulation is one of the areas where the line has garnered some criticism in particular. Black Series goes for single jointed elbows instead of the typical double joints and ball jointed torsos instead of an ab crunch. The reason for this comes back to presentation. Sculpt and look are the highest priority, and double elbows would take away from the sculpt of, say, Han Solo's jacket or Count Dooku's sleeves. This really highlights the difference in approach compared to a line like Marvel Legends, where even the movie figures usually have double jointed articulation. Legends are about super dynamic poses. Black Series is about more realistic poses and capturing the details. Figures with cloth sleeves, like Farm Boy Luke, the Emperor Snoke, or even Yoda, always use double jointed elbows because they're hidden. Black Series has made huge strides in this area, and in the last few years have essentially perfected the art of the single jointed elbow. Although I will be the first to admit, oftentimes I do wish they were double jointed, or at least had a higher range on the single joint, which we are starting to see, to pull off some poses. The reason for this is that Black Series uses a longer elbow joint with a larger indent in the upper arm. SH Figuarts is also known to use this, but this allows for figures with single elbows, like say any of the recent Kylo Rens, to get pretty much the same range as the double elbow while preserving the sculpt, which is a new stride they have made. These elbows have become the default for basically any non-trooper figure in the line and have been carried over into some of the newer female figures on the Marvel Legends. As for the torso joint, again, we come back to preserving the sculpt and allowing for a more realistic range than an ab crunch. The ab crunch allows for a far greater range one way, but is ultimately a more noticeable joint. Now, one figure and notable exception, the 2017 fan vote Jaina Solo, which combined the standard mid-torso ball joint with an ab crunch at the base of the torso. The result was beautiful, preserving the sculpt and giving you all the articulation you could want. But unfortunately, it was only used for her and her repaint remold as Dr. Aphra. But they do seem to be using this approach with their G.I. Joe line. This exact setup has actually been the standard for Hasbro's Power Rangers collection as well. Now, another thing that needs to be noticed is about 2 years ago, Black Series swapped out the standard ball joint attached to a hinge setup from the head to the neck for a double ball peg from the head to the neck. And even more recently, we've seen it from the neck to the chest. This limits the super severe upward or downward movement of the head, but allows for infinitely more tilt and ultimately more character. Again, the goal with Star Wars merch is, in general, isn't the super dynamic poses, but realism, and this definitely is an improvement. Do you need Luke Skywalker or Admiral Holdo to have their necks up at a 180-degree angle? No. But even with the improved ball joint from the neck into the chest, which we're starting to see, it allows for the more downward movement, which is something that's a lot more natural in regard to character posing within that universe. And then the last bit we have to talk about are the legs. The Black Series has used double jointed knees. They aren't always the prettiest, but allow for more range. Recently, particularly with Count Dooku and the Knight of Ren, they've switched to a single jointed knee using a similar large joint with a deeper cut like they've done with the elbows. The goal being to aesthetically present better than a double joint, but get a similar range. Once again, this is also what Figuarts does more elegantly with a ball hinge than what Black Series does with a hinge attached to a swivel, but it is an improvement. And to be fair, even this growth with Black Series looks better than the double joint, but doesn't quite perform as effectively as the single jointed elbow. The plan seems for this to become the new standard going forward, and will probably only improve with time. So now we have figures featuring an overall good range, nothing crazy, definitely not Marvel Legends, but not trying to be, preserving the sculpt and presentation while trying to go for more realistic poses. So let's talk about likenesses. Perhaps the single biggest improvement Black Series and all of Hasbro lines in general have made has been in likeness. In 2017, Hasbro revealed 2 waves of Marvel Legends to tie into the Guardians Volume 2. The second of these waves featured a digitally applied application to the faces of Gamora and Nebula, not unlike what SHF does. They were released with no fanfare or call out of this on Hasbro's part and seemed to be a test, but the community went nuts, and soon Marvel Legends announced that this would be the new standard for movie figures. By this time, Black Series had most of that year's remaining figures, the Last Jedi waves, already in production. But from the beginning of 2018, all figures would utilize this photoreal technology, and it is beautiful. Hasbro has this technology patented and won't reveal exactly how it works, but we know it essentially uses a photo of an actor to digitally print a likeness on a plastic face. It means you can literally print on shading and skin tone, something that was virtually impossible for mass production to do before. Until 2018, likeness had always been the line's Achilles heel. The first waves in 2013, with figures like X-Wing Luke, A New Hope Han, and Slave Leia, had above average paint and likeness for the time, but from 2014, the facial paint took an absolute nosedive. Figures like the Emperor, The Force Awakens Rey, Jango Fett, Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, the list goes on and on. Virtually every human figure from 2014 to the end of 2016 looked pretty awful. Paint apps were significantly tightened up for the Last Jedi figures, but they still weren't great. Thankfully, this has passed, and the Black Series now has some of the best likeness ever seen on a 1/12 scale figure, and even hold their own with SHF. Hasbro has also begun re-releasing older figures with updated paint apps using their new technology through the Archive and Empire Strikes Back 40th anniversary lines, and the results prove the sculpts were there all along. Just compare the original release of Anakin to the new one, or X-Wing Luke, or Yoda, or Palpatine, or any of them, and remember, it's the same sculpt. They've even done it with their 3 3/4 figures, and it's pretty impressive. So where does this leave us going forward? We have a line where most figures are original sculpts with a high degree of accuracy and tons of paint, excellent likeness, and useful articulation that conveys the character without destroying the sculpt. With all their advances and the continuing changes with the new knees, it's clear Hasbro is keen to continue innovating. They keep pushing with this line. Now, I try not to be a cynic, but we know that the license was up for renegotiations, and Hasbro has sealed that deal, but hopefully it won't prevent their hunger and their appetite for improving this line in the future. Hopefully they won't see this as a goal accomplished and continue pushing. So what changes should they make in the future? A big criticism in the line has been lack of accessories. Most figures come with 1 or 2, and you know, for me, one of my big issues is swap out hands. Swap out hands need to become the new standard, both with their G.I. Joe lines and their Star Wars lines specifically. I'm tired of having figures posed on the shelf reaching for the invisible cup or ready to put their fingers on the home keys of a computer with no computer in sight. Interchangeable hands are common with some of the other lines, but are pretty rare with Black Series. But the key reason for this most likely has been the licensing fee. From 2013 until this year, Disney and Lucasfilm charged an insanely high license fee for Star Wars. Hasbro had to pay about 20% of royalties made from Star Wars to Disney. That's massive in industry terms, with most similar licenses being about 7 to 10%, on top of also paying minimum guarantees. Now, this has changed. A few months months ago, Hasbro and Disney renewed that license fee we were just talking about, or that license rather, for Star Wars and Marvel. The specifics haven't been released yet, but it's largely believed the license fee was decreased for Star Wars and increased for Marvel. For collectors, this is a good thing. One of the reasons we've seen unusually high prices for much of Hasbro's Star Wars stuff in the last decade, does anybody remember the $250 First Order TIE Fighter? Has probably been the fees. And while Star Wars is still very popular and sales are on the up, despite what many would have you believe, we all know Marvel is the big boy in town. Sales for lines like Marvel Legends absolutely skyrocketed from about 2015 onwards, and a higher fee per figure likely isn't going to change anything for that line since it sells so dramatically well. So the hope is that this will give Hasbro the freedom to start including extras like alternative heads, hands, and I would also like to see a return to some of the soft goods instead of plastic capes. You know, I can't stand a plastic cape. And to be fair, we might be actually seeing some of this already, with the new Hoth Rebel Trooper including swappable faces and weapons, and the 6-inch scale snow speeder with DAC costing $120, which is most definitely cheaper than this thing would have been 3 years ago. Perhaps we could even get the white rod through the center of the blade one day. Hasbro can and has done this. The 3 3/4-inch McQuarrie concept Stormtrooper from 2007 has this exact method of lightsaber, and while it looks a little bulky on a 3 3/4 figure, I can't help but wonder what it would look like on my 6-inch line, so to speak. Hope that was helpful. Hope that it was engaging. Hope you're being safe. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.